there is always a shadow moving behind us, one we rarely acknowledge, though it trails us faithfully through every choice, every moment, every mistake. It is not the monster outside your door, nor the stranger who lingers on the corner of your street. No, it is far more intimate. It is the weakness you keep tucked away, the flaw you bury beneath excuses, the hunger you feed in secret until it grows teeth sharp enough to devour you. Stephen King once wrote that monsters are real, and ghosts are real too. They live inside us, and sometimes they win. The terror isn't in the haunted house or the vampire bathed in moonlight. It is in the ordinary soul who refuses to admit they are fragile, who denies their cracks until those cracks become fault lines that split them open. Fear is not always a scream in the night. Sometimes it is quieter, a trembling hand when no one's watching, the tightening of the jaw when your boss insults you in front of others, the private bitterness that gnaws at you when the world seems to move without you. Fear is humiliation left unresolved. Fear is envy that festers until it burns holes in your chest. Fear is pretending you are strong when every cell of your body is begging you to confess weakness. It's no coincidence that in Salem's lot, the evil didn't have to break down the doors of Jerusalem's lot with brute force. The rot had already spread through the town long before Barlow arrived. Greed, lust, pride, cowardice, they were the cracks in the wood, and evil only needed to slip through those tiny openings to make itself at home. We live in a world obsessed with strength. Smile wider, work harder, never let them see you break. We plaster ourselves in masks of competence, desperate to convince everyone, including ourselves, that we are untouchable. But here's the truth. The mask does not protect you. It suffocates you. Every time you tell yourself, "I'm fine," when you're drowning. Every time you laugh along with the crowd while secretly feeling the sting of their cruelty. You are making a deal with a hidden beast. You feed it silence, and in return, it grows more powerful. Until one day, that beast becomes you. Weakness is not shameful. What is shameful is lying to yourself about it. Society trains us to despise the cracks in human nature, to cover them with makeup, alcohol, empty words, shallow achievements. But those cracks don't disappear, they expand. And with time, what you've hidden becomes the very weapon that turns against you. Think about it. How many scandals, betrayals, or crimes have their roots not in overwhelming evil, but in ordinary people pretending too long that they were invincible? The crooked politician who convinced himself he was untouchable. The parent who drowned their grief in anger until they shattered the family they swore to protect. The friend who, too ashamed to ask for help, chose silence until their silence consumed them. When Stephen King writes of small towns infected by evil, he isn't really writing about vampires or possessed clowns. He is writing about us, the way we abandon each other in quiet moments of need, the way we cling to our reputations at the cost of our souls, the way we punish honesty but reward performance. The supernatural is just a mask for something far more frightening: what happens when weakness festers in silence. But let me ask you, how do you react when someone exposes their weakness to you? Do you feel compassion or contempt? Do you listen or do you look away? Relieved it isn't you? Human morality isn't tested in moments of strength, but in our response to fragility. That is where cruelty thrives, and it is where redemption can still bloom, if we allow it. The danger is not in admitting you are weak. The danger is in pretending you are not. Fear of shame becomes fertile soil for destruction. A person who cannot face their own shadow will project it onto others. A husband hides his fear of failure by lashing out at his wife. A teenager hides their loneliness by bullying the quieter kid in class. A community hides its own corruption by pointing fingers at an outsider. This is how weakness transforms into evil, not through its existence, but through denial. And here is where the psychology of crime intersects with the psychology of ordinary life. Every mistake begins with a refusal to admit vulnerability. The drunk driver didn't want to look weak by asking for a ride home. The thief didn't want to look powerless in the face of poverty. The killer didn't want to feel humiliated by rejection. Weakness denied becomes violence justified. It is not strength that makes monsters. It is weakness dressed up as armor. There is a moment in Salem's Lot where the true horror is not the vampire at the window, but the townsfolk closing their eyes, choosing not to see. They refuse to confront what is happening because confronting it means confronting their own complicity, their own fragility, and that refusal is what damns them. Evil doesn't need an invitation to enter your home. It only needs your silence. So I ask you, what weakness are you refusing to admit? What part of yourself have you buried so deeply that you now mistake denial for strength? When was the last time you confessed, not to another person, but to yourself, that you were afraid, or jealous, or broken? And how long do you think that silence will hold before it cracks wide open? Because the weakness you refuse to admit will not vanish. It will wait for you, patient and cruel, until the moment you can no longer contain it. And when that moment comes, it will not ask permission. It will consume. The truth is that the human heart is not a fortress, though we often pretend it is. We tell ourselves we can barricade the pain, seal away the fear, and board up the fragile windows of our soul. But wood rots, stone cracks, and the more you press your weight against the door to keep the darkness inside, the louder the pounding becomes. Denial is not strength. It is surrender disguised as defiance. You may look unshaken to the world, but inside you are negotiating with the very demons you swore never to face. Think of how many people destroy themselves quietly, not with a single dramatic act, but through 1,000 daily compromises with their own unacknowledged weakness. The worker who swallows resentment until it corrodes their joy. The child who hides their terror of abandonment behind silence, only to grow into an adult who cannot trust love. The man who believes admitting his depression is a failure until the burden drives him to actions from which he cannot return. Weakness is not the enemy. It is the refusal to meet it eye to eye that poisons us. Stephen King's Salem's Lot thrives on this truth. Evil didn't storm the town gates in a fiery spectacle. It seeped in, drip by drip. Through doors people left unlocked, through wounds they refused to acknowledge. A priest's crisis of faith, a boy's need for belonging, a mother's desperation to hold on to her child. Each weakness denied, each truth buried, became a candle lit to guide the dark things closer. The supernatural is only terrifying because it mirrors the human. And what is more terrifying than watching someone you love destroy themselves? Not from outside attack, but from a refusal to admit their own fragility? We want to believe morality is a clear choice, good versus evil, hero versus villain. But morality is far messier. It lives in moments when we could ask for help but choose silence. when we could show mercy but choose cruelty, when we could forgive ourselves but instead build prisons out of guilt. The criminal mind is not alien. It is human, pushed past the brink of denial. Behind every mugshot is a story of weakness that curdled into desperation, shame that fermented into violence. A mistake that could have been an opportunity for humility became a stage for catastrophe. The irony is that society does not make it easy to admit weakness. We scorn it, mock it, punish it. A child cries, and we tell them to toughen up. A man breaks under grief, and we call him fragile. A woman shows vulnerability, and we label her hysterical, and yet, in private, we all beg for someone to see through our armor, to tell us that weakness does not make us unworthy. This is why so many fall. The world demands strength at all costs, so we counterfeit it, even if it kills us. Imagine for a moment that you are holding a glass of water. At first, it feels weightless. Hold it for a minute, and it's fine. Hold it for an hour, and your arm begins to ache. Hold it for a day, and your muscles tremble, threatening collapse. The weight never changed, but your refusal to set it down becomes the problem. Weakness denied is like that glass of water. The longer you refuse to admit you are carrying it, the more it breaks you. And when you finally drop it, it shatters, not just in your hands, but in the lives of everyone around you. Inner turmoil is not a private affair. Your silence echoes. Your denial bleeds into the people closest to you. The anger you repress explodes on the wrong person. The grief you bury hardens into bitterness that seeps into your children. The fear you mask becomes the blueprint for someone else's fear. Society is not a collection of isolated beings. It is a web, trembling with every hidden struggle. And when too many of us refuse to admit weakness, the web tears. That's when communities collapse, when cruelty spreads like wildfire, when good people stand by and watch horror unfold because facing it means facing themselves. Ask yourself, what would have happened if the townsfolk of Jerusalem's lot had acknowledged their cracks before the vampire came? If they had confessed their loneliness, their greed, their failings to each other, would evil have found such easy purchase? Or is it always our refusal to speak, our refusal to confess, that sets the table for the feast? Here is the cruel paradox. We are taught to fear weakness as the thing that destroys us. But it is not weakness itself. It is the refusal to name it. The courage to say, "I am broken," is the only thing that keeps you whole. The strength to whisper, "I am afraid," is the only thing that keeps fear from owning you. The humility to say, "I was wrong," is the only thing that keeps a mistake from becoming a tragedy. And yet, how many of us can say those words aloud? How many of us can say them to ourselves? We live in a culture that glorifies the mask, but condemns the unmasking. To admit you are vulnerable is to risk judgment, to risk exile from the tribe that prizes strength above all else. And so, most of us walk through life rehearsing performances instead of living truths. We are actors on a stage built from fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being ridiculed, fear of being seen for what we really are, human. But the longer you perform strength, the more fragile you become. Because the mask does not protect you from weakness, it hides it until it grows monstrous. Think of weakness like mold creeping across the beams of an old house. If you catch it early, you can clean it, treat it, reinforce the structure. But if you cover it with wallpaper, pretending it isn't there, Eventually, the beams will rot, and the house will collapse. That is the soul in denial. It may look solid to outsiders, even beautiful, but inside, the decay is eating everything alive. That is how families shatter. That is how friendships dissolve. That is how ordinary people like you and me, end up committing acts they once swore were unthinkable. The psychology of making a mistake is not about the error itself. It is about the story we tell ourselves afterward. Some people admit the mistake, learn from it, and change. Others deny it, hide it, justify it, and in that justification, they begin to descend. A single mistake is not fatal, but a mistake you refuse to own transforms into something malignant. It becomes a justification for another mistake, and then another, until you wake up one morning and cannot recognize the person you've become. Salem's Lot gives us a chilling example of this in Father Callahan. His weakness was not in lacking faith, it was in refusing to admit his doubt instead of facing it. He covered it with arrogance, with bravado, pretending his strength was absolute. But when the true test came, when evil looked him in the eye, his denial shattered him, his weakness consumed him because he would not confess it, even to himself. And isn't that the story of so many people we know? People who drown in alcohol, or bury themselves in work, or rage at everyone else, because the one thing they cannot bear is the truth of their own vulnerability. The human mind is a labyrinth, and within it there is always a room we avoid entering. Maybe it's grief, maybe it's shame, maybe it's rage we've never admitted to feeling. We lock the door, tell ourselves it doesn't exist, and we throw away the key. But the thing we bury does not die. It waits, and when it breaks free, it does so with a vengeance. This is why people who seem so normal can suddenly explode with violence, cruelty, or despair. They are not monsters. They are us, weakness denied until it becomes unbearable. Society teaches us to punish mistakes harshly, as if that will scare people into being better. But fear doesn't erase weakness, it deepens it. Fear teaches us to lie, to hide, to wear masks so convincing that no one, not even ourselves, can see the truth. And when that truth finally erupts, it does not emerge as a whisper. It comes like a hurricane. That is the criminal psychology of mistakes. They are rarely about evil intentions. They are about fear. Fear of being seen as weak. Fear of losing control. Fear of facing ourselves. But here lies the contradiction. Compassion is the only thing that interrupts this cycle, and yet it is the very thing society withholds. We laugh at the kid who cries. We shame the addict who relapses. We scorn the man who asks for help. We punish the weakness instead of addressing it. And in doing so, we breed more weakness. What might happen if, instead, we created spaces where weakness could be admitted without fear? What would happen if we treated vulnerability not as shameful, but as the seed of strength? Because that is the truth. Strength is not the absence of weakness. It is the courage to face weakness. The strongest people are not the ones who never fall, but the ones who admit when they are on their knees and still find a way to rise. To confess weakness is not to be destroyed by it, it is to disarm it. But silence is a deal with the devil. So here is the question that lingers. The question I leave hanging in the air for you: what mask are you wearing right now? What weakness are you hiding so well that even you pretend not to see it? And if you continue to deny it, How long before it devours you? The weight of unspoken weakness is a poison, but it is slow, subtle, almost elegant in the way it eats away at you. It does not strike all at once. It whispers. It convinces you that silence is safety, that pretending is protection, but every suppressed truth, every buried emotion, is a seed planted in the soil of your psyche. Left alone, it grows into something with thorns. It becomes a vine wrapping tighter and tighter until it strangles the very life it was meant to protect. That is the quiet cruelty of denial. It does not feel dangerous until it is too late. In Salem's lot, when the vampire Barlow arrives, he does not conquer the town by force. He exploits. He exploits the loneliness of the old, the greed of the ambitious, the shame of the fallen. He does not create weakness. He feeds on it. And isn't that what happens in our own lives? Life does not always destroy us by hitting us where we are strong. It slips into the cracks we refuse to repair. The affair doesn't begin with love. It begins with loneliness ignored. The addiction doesn't start with desire. It starts with pain denied. The betrayal doesn't rise from malice. It rises from a weakness unacknowledged until it grows bold enough to demand satisfaction. And this is where the struggle becomes unbearable. To admit weakness is to feel naked, but to hide it is to bleed in silence. This tension is what drives people to collapse under their own weight. Criminal psychology is built on this paradox. Rarely does someone wake up one day and decide to destroy their life or the lives of others. Instead, they carry their private weakness until the burden warps them, until they believe there is no other option but violence, deception, or escape, until the mask they wear feels tighter than their own skin. The irony is that every single one of us knows this feeling. We may not all break the law, but we all break under pressure. The same emotional struggle that pushes one person into crime pushes another into depression, another into self-destruction, another into silence so deep it becomes a living death. Different outcomes, same root. A refusal to admit the truth of our fragility. And yet, fragility is not failure. It is the essence of being human. The ability to weep, to confess, to tremble, to say, "I cannot do this alone." That is not weakness. That is survival. But we have built a world where survival feels shameful, unless it looks like strength. We demand heroism from people who can barely breathe. We tell them to get over it, to be strong, when what they need is not another command, but a hand to hold in the dark. This is why compassion matters. Not pity, not condescension. Compassion. The willingness to sit beside another person in their weakness and say, "I see you, and you are not less because you are hurting." Compassion interrupts the cycle that transforms weakness into destruction. It allows people to admit before it is too late, to confess before silence becomes unbearable. Without compassion, weakness becomes crime. With compassion, weakness becomes connection. But here is the hardest truth of all. Compassion must begin with yourself. You cannot wait for the world to give you permission to be human. You must give yourself permission. You must look in the mirror and admit what you have spent years denying. You must tell yourself the truth, even if your voice shakes. Because if you do not, that hidden weakness will one day tell the truth for you, and it will not be gentle. So let me ask you now, what part of yourself have you been silencing? What wound have you wallpapered over? convincing yourself it is gone? What mistake have you refused to own, even though it claws at you in the quiet of the night? And how much longer will you carry it, knowing that every step you take in denial brings you closer to collapse? The weakness you refuse to admit will destroy you, not because weakness itself is lethal, but because denial is. The refusal to speak, the refusal to face, the refusal to confess, that is the true vampire. It drains you drop by drop until one day there is nothing left. Weakness wears many disguises, and the cruelest of them all is pride. Pride whispers that admitting fragility is surrender. Pride tells you that silence is noble, that endurance without confession is strength. But pride is nothing more than fear in costume. It is the fear of humiliation, pretending to be dignity. It is the fear of rejection, masquerading as independence. Pride builds walls around you, but walls don't protect, they isolate. And isolation is where weakness thrives, where it multiplies, where it learns to speak in your own voice until you can no longer tell the difference between truth and denial. The people of Salem's lot could not save themselves because their pride kept them blind. They did not want to admit that their town was rotting from within. They did not want to face the shadows in their own homes, their own hearts. And so, when the darkness came, they folded, not because they were evil, but because they were afraid to look weak in front of each other. And isn't that the same poison we swallow every day? We post our curated smiles, our filtered successes, our artificial strength, while quietly, in the rooms no one sees, we rot. Every mistake you've ever made carries a fork in the road. One path is humility, an admission, a lesson, a chance to begin again. The other path is denial, covering it up, blaming others, pretending it never happened. The first path hurts, but it heals. The second path feels easier in the moment, but it leads you deeper into the labyrinth where every lie must be covered by another. And by the time you realize you're lost, the walls have already closed in. That is the criminal psychology of downfall. Not one great leap into darkness, but 1,000 tiny steps, each one justified by the refusal to admit weakness. We are taught to fear failure as if it will annihilate us. But failure does not destroy, it clarifies. What destroys is the silence that follows failure. The insistence on pretending you are unshaken when your bones are already cracking. Imagine a bridge with a fracture in its steel. If the engineer admits the weakness, repairs can be made. If the engineer hides it, tragedy is inevitable. You are that bridge. The fractures in you are not your doom. Your doom comes only if you pretend they are not there. The question that burns beneath all of this is simple. Why are we so afraid to admit weakness? The answer is not just personal, it is social. Because we live in systems that punish fragility, workplaces that demand constant productivity, families that reward silence over honesty, communities that gossip about pain instead of holding it. We have built cultures where strength is currency and weakness is debt, but debt unpaid only grows. And when it comes due, the cost is devastation. This is why acts of cruelty often erupt from the most ordinary places. The neighbor who lashes out at his family, the colleague who betrays a friend, the stranger who commits an unspeakable crime. These are not monsters born in the dark. They are human beings who carried hidden weakness until it metastasized into destruction. They are us. taken one step further down the path of denial. And this brings us to the core of emotional struggle, the inner battle between confession and concealment. The mind tells you, hide it, and you will survive. But the heart knows, if you hide it too long, it will consume you. The struggle is not between good and evil. It is between truth and silence, between facing yourself and fleeing from yourself, between admitting weakness while it is still small, or waiting until it becomes large enough to own you. So, what choice will you make? Will you face your weakness? Name it, admit it, and in doing so, disarm it? Or will you keep feeding it silence, watching it grow until one day it is no longer a shadow behind you, but the very shape of your life? Because the weakness you refuse to admit will not forgive you. It will not forget. It will wait. And when it rises, it will not only destroy you, it will destroy everyone who ever tried to love you. There is a peculiar cruelty in how the human mind works. It convinces us that tomorrow is safer than today. Tomorrow, I'll admit the truth. Tomorrow, I'll confront the fear. Tomorrow, I'll mend the mistake. But tomorrow is a mirage. The more you chase it, the further it drifts, until you realize you've built an entire life on postponement. And in that silence, weakness metastasizes. It doesn't wait politely. It grows sharper, hungrier, more ruthless. By the time you finally look it in the eye, it no longer resembles a wound. It has become a weapon. That is why so many of us fall apart, not in moments of chaos, but in moments of stillness, when the noise stops, when the distractions fade, when you're left alone with yourself. The cracks whisper. You hear the things you've buried, the mistake you never confessed, the grief you never processed, the anger you never admitted was yours. You tell yourself it's in the past, but the past is never dead. It waits for acknowledgement, and until it is acknowledged, it lives inside you, shaping your choices, bending your morality, distorting your view of the world. This is the haunting truth in Salem's Lot. The vampires were not the true enemy. They were simply the mirror. They reflected the cowardice, the selfishness, the hunger already embedded in the townsfolk. The real horror was not the creatures outside their windows. It was the darkness already coiled inside their chests. Evil doesn't need to create weakness. It only needs to feed on it. And isn't that what happens every time someone gives in to temptation? Cruelty? Or violence? The darkness does not arrive out of nowhere. It slips in through the smallest denial. The affair begins with a conversation you tell yourself doesn't mean anything. The betrayal begins with a rationalization you whisper to yourself in the dark. The crime begins with a thought you insist you would never act on. One step, then another, a weakness hidden, a denial repeated, until one day you find yourself standing in the ruins of a life you swore was safe. There is no prison more suffocating than the one we build for ourselves with silence. And yet, so many of us prefer it. Why? Because to break the silence, to confess weakness, is to risk rejection, to risk being seen as flawed, to risk being unloved. But here is the truth. Weakness unspoken is more dangerous than weakness confessed. Confession may hurt, but silence kills. The outcome of denial is always the same. Destruction, sometimes slow, sometimes sudden, but always certain. That is the price of pretending. And yet, inside that truth is a flicker of hope, because the opposite is also certain. When weakness is admitted, when fragility is faced, When mistakes are confessed, something shifts. The burden lightens. The poison drains. The beast loses its teeth. What once threatened to destroy you becomes the very thing that saves you, because it forces you into honesty, into humility, into connection. So here is the choice before you. Whether you realize it or not, you can carry your weakness in silence until it consumes you, or you can admit it and strip it of its power. One path leads to ruin, the other to redemption. There is no third option. And yet, I must leave you with this. If you look honestly into yourself right now, what do you see waiting in the shadows? What is the weakness you have refused to name? And if you refuse to admit it even now, how long before it destroys you? Every life carries a hidden ledger, a quiet record of debts unpaid and truths unspoken. You can ignore it for years, even decades, but the account never disappears. Each time you deny your weakness, you add another line to the page. Each time you bury your guilt, your fear, your failure, the balance grows, and eventually, the bill arrives, not in paper, not in numbers, but in the form of consequences, relationships shattered, trust broken, opportunities lost, and sometimes, an entire identity destroyed. This is the psychology of collapse. It does not come like lightning from a clear sky. It comes like water against stone, soft but relentless, one drop, then another, until the rock itself is hollowed. You may think you are strong enough to withstand it, but denial does not wear you down all at once. It erodes you grain by grain. And the danger lies in how invisible that erosion feels, how natural it seems to continue pretending. You tell yourself you are surviving, but really, you are dissolving. Look closely at the mistakes that destroy people. Rarely are they isolated, they are chains. Each link forged by denial. The alcoholic who insists, "I can stop whenever I want." The liar who convinces themselves, "It was only once, it won't happen again." The abuser who whispers, "I was pushed to it, it wasn't my fault." These are not excuses. They are locks on the prison door. Each one makes escape harder. Each one makes the inevitable collapse more violent. Stephen King knew this truth well in Salem's Lot. The town did not fall in a single night. It rotted slowly, choice by choice, silence by silence. By the time the evil revealed itself, it was too late. The people had already surrendered, not with weapons, but with denial. And isn't that exactly how so many of us lose ourselves? Not by being defeated outright, but by handing ourselves over in small increments, weakness by weakness, lie by lie, until we wake up and realize we are no longer who we thought we were. But here's the paradox. The very thing we fear, admitting weakness, is the only thing that can save us. There is a strange kind of strength in confession, a power that grows not from perfection but from vulnerability. To say, "I was wrong," to say, "I need help," to say, "I am afraid." These are not acts of weakness. They are acts of defiance against the silence that seeks to own you. They are the only weapon strong enough to break the cycle of denial. And yet, most of us still refuse. Because confession feels like stepping into fire, while silence feels like shelter. But silence is not shelter, it is gasoline. And the longer you hide in it, the hotter the fire will burn when it finally catches. That is why so many lives end not with a single mistake, but with the explosion of years of unspoken ones. The tragedy is not that we are weak, It is that we choose silence until weakness becomes unmanageable. So I ask you again, what is it you are hiding? What truth have you told yourself you'll face tomorrow, while knowing tomorrow never comes? And when the bill for your silence finally arrives, what will it cost you? Because the weakness you refuse to admit is not waiting to be forgiven. It is waiting to destroy. The longer you live in denial, the more your weakness ceases to be a private flaw and becomes a public fate. At first, it is invisible, a quiet insecurity, a silent fear, a secret hunger, but as it festers, it begins to shape the way you move through the world. It seeps into your voice, your choices, your relationships. People may not name it, but they feel it. They sense the anger beneath your smile, the desperation beneath your confidence, the hollowness behind your strength. Weakness unacknowledged always leaks through the cracks. And when it finally erupts, it does so mercilessly. The man who never admits his despair is the one most likely to end his life suddenly, leaving others in shock. The woman who buries her loneliness may one day abandon her family without warning. The child who grows up learning that weakness is shameful may grow into an adult who takes that shame out on others, repeating the cycle of cruelty. These explosions are not sudden. They are the climax of years of silence. Salem's lot is drenched in this truth. The town is destroyed not because evil was strong, but because people were weak and refused to confess it. The school bully, the abusive parent, the corrupt businessman, all of them already served the darkness long before the vampire came. Evil merely harvested what had already been sown. And isn't that how life works? Catastrophe rarely arrives from outside. It grows inside us, nurtured by our refusal to face ourselves. Criminal psychology teaches us something chilling. Most crimes are acts of desperation, born from an inability to process weakness. A man steals because he cannot bear to look powerless. A woman kills because she cannot face rejection. A fraudster lies because he cannot admit failure. The crime is the mask, the desperate attempt to cover a weakness that feels unbearable to expose. And in that attempt to hide, they reveal everything. But there is another path, a harder one, the path most of us avoid, to admit weakness before it destroys, to stop mid-step, before silence becomes catastrophe, to say I am not okay, to say I am failing, to say I need you. It feels like surrender, but it is the only true victory, because once you speak it, the beast loses its power. Weakness thrives in silence, but it starves in the open air of confession. Still, most of us cling to silence. Why? Because we fear what others will think if they see us weak. But here is the secret. They already know. They may not know the details, but they sense the weight you carry. Humans are not as opaque as we imagine. Our shadows bleed into the world, whether we admit them or not. The difference is simple. When you confess, you control the story. When you stay silent, the story controls you. So I ask you now, directly, without metaphor or veil, what is your weakness? Not the one you tell others to seem humble, not the rehearsed confession you offer when you want to look honest, but the real one, the one you've locked away, the one you're terrified to even whisper. Because if you do not name it, it will name you, and when it does, it will not do so gently. The weakness you refuse to admit is not waiting in the dark to be forgiven. It is sharpening its claws, biding its time, preparing to strike. The only question is, will you face it now, or will you wait until it destroys everything you love? There comes a moment in every life when the silence can no longer hold. You may think you can keep it buried forever, but the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. It slips out in the sharpness of your words, in the bitterness of your laughter, in the sleepless nights when you cannot escape yourself. You can run, but you cannot outrun the parts of you you've chained in the dark. They know your footsteps. They follow. In Salem's lot, what destroyed the town wasn't just the vampires' hunger, it was the people's refusal to stand together, to admit their fear, to trust each other with the truth. One by one, they fell because they fought alone, each pretending they were stronger than they were. That is the final cruelty of weakness denied. It isolates you. It convinces you that no one would understand. No one could carry your burden, so you must carry it alone. But that loneliness is the doorway through which destruction enters. The emotional struggle is universal, yet most of us believe ours is unique. We convince ourselves that no one else has ever felt this kind of shame, this kind of failure, this kind of fear, so we hide it. But in hiding, we cut ourselves off from the very thing that could save us: connection. Human beings were not made to carry their weakness in silence. We were made to share it, to confess it, to hold each other through it. That is not weakness. That is survival. Criminal psychology reveals something haunting. Many people who commit irreversible acts confess afterward that all they wanted was to be heard, to be seen, to have someone recognize their weakness before it swallowed them whole. The crime was not their true desire. It was their scream for recognition. Their desperate attempt to make the world acknowledge what they themselves could not admit. When silence becomes unbearable, destruction becomes the only language left. But what if it didn't have to get that far? What if the real strength is not in hiding but in speaking? What if the measure of your humanity is not how well you bury your flaws, but how bravely you reveal them? There is a kind of courage in standing naked before the world, not with your body, but with your soul, and saying, "Here is where I break. Here is where I bleed. And still, I am worthy." The weakness you refuse to admit will destroy you, but only if you let it stay in the dark. Drag it into the light, and it loses its teeth. Name it, and it loses its grip. Share it, and it becomes smaller, lighter, bearable. This is the paradox that society hides from us. The very thing we fear exposing is the very thing that will set us free. So I leave you with this. Tonight, when the room is quiet and the shadows press close, ask yourself the question you've avoided. Ask it without flinching. What is the weakness I am refusing to admit? And then answer it. Not tomorrow, not someday, now. Because if you do not, one day it will answer for you. And when it does, it will not whisper, it will roar.